Season 2 balance changes have arrived, which means it's time once again for the top 10 guns in Call of Duty Mobile. We don't typically get a lot of balance changes that impact the top 10, but there are a lot of guns that just got a whole lot better, so we got a lot to talk about. Hope you guys enjoy. Make sure to drop a like if you do. Big shout out to COD Mobile for sponsoring this video. If you haven't already, you can download the game with the link in the description. But without any more talking, we'll go ahead and hop into it. To get things started, our first honorable mention goes to a gun that is definitely on the brink of becoming meta, and COD Mobile definitely seems bent on making it that way. The M13 got yet another buff in the Season 2 update. As one of the fastest firing assault rifles in the game with pretty solid range and a nice headshot multiplier, the M13 is an assault rifle that even pro players have started to dabble with here and there, and were it not for the bad base iron sights and the need to have a mythic in order to really optimize its utility, I'd probably have it a little bit higher on the list. We also have the Tundra Sniper, which was featured inside of our top 10 last season. It got a nerf this season. While I do absolutely still think that it is the best sniper in the game, I don't think it's quite at the dominant level that it was to stay inside of our top 10, not because it got that much worse, but just because of the overall lack of versatility whenever it comes to snipers in COD Mobile. Lastly, we got the UL 736, which I believe is still the best LMG in the game. Didn't get any worse, and I actually got an attachment that I think is super solid, but just because of a couple of guns that got buffed, it does get moved slightly outside of our top 10. Coming in at number 10, we've got a high risk, high reward option. That's the CX9 with the 12 round burst magazine. The CX9 is definitely one of the better options to use if you're a free-to-play player, because the base version has very solid iron sights, but the base version of the gun without the hollow point mag does struggle to keep up in regards to the gun's overall damage output and especially its range. The hollow point mag offers ridiculous damage boost and a crazy amount of movement speed, which means that for movement gods, this is going to be one of the most lethal options in the entire game. Now, obviously, the big downside to this is the fact that you've only got 12 bullets, but if you're accurate enough, that's all you really need. The gun's capable of one bursting at pretty crazy ranges, and especially whenever you're able to achieve a 3 or 4 shot, has a time to kill that's effectively untouchable. I would recommend it primarily for search and destroy because it's tough to play respawns when you've only got 12 rounds per magazine, but if you're able to master it, anything is possible. Next up at number 9, we have one of the guns that received a buff this season. I believe is now going to be one of the most lethal options in the game in the Man of War. To a degree, the Man of War is also another high risk, high reward option for a couple of different reasons. Number one, the biggest part of the buff that it received is the headshot multiplier, which now gives it the ability to 2-tap to the head. With maximum BSA of 38.5 meters, you can build this thing to be an absolute tank. The only downside is it doesn't have great mobility, so you're going to want to build for the in-between. The other nice thing about the Man of War is it has really generous multipliers, which means no matter where you're hitting on the body, you're guaranteed to 3-shot in the first damage range. Naturally, the one trade-off to this is that it also has a slower rate of fire than the majority of the other 3-tap assault rifles, so the more shots that you miss, the more punishing it starts to become. The other nice thing is with the headshot multiplier buff that the Man of War has received, now you're going to be able to 3-tap potentially all the way out to 70 meters depending on how you build your loadout if you can land one headshot, which gives it one of the crazier time to kills that you can receive at long range in the entire game. Once again, this is a very specialized AR and requires a fairly passive playstyle, but I think as people start to master the Man of War, they'll realize just how good it can be. Coming in at number 8, a gun that has just become too dominant in the competitive scene to leave it out anymore, the R9 has moved into our top 10 guns. A few seasons back, the R9 actually did get a buff that increased the gun's bullet spread accuracy, and naturally as a BSA only type of shotgun, that made the R9 even better. The speed of the follow-up shot obviously is the biggest upside of the R9, and you combine that with the amount of range that it has with the way you can build it out, there's not much you're going to be able to do to stop this in close range. It is definitely a very specialized weapon and requires a specific playstyle. Once you master this thing, you will be nearly untouchable. Coming in at number 7, you won't be very surprised to see that the Kilo is still in our top 10 guns. Biggest reason that it's not higher, once again, is that it's not nearly as good if you don't have the mythic version, but the Kilo is a super solid long-range assault rifle. Doesn't necessarily have the fastest playstyle, but is a really solid post-up AR, has the ability to drop down the time to kill if you're landing headshots, is an overall great weapon for any map, and even if you need to use a red dot on it, can still be a phenomenal option. Our next gun is not higher on the list for similar reasons. The Fennec is once again very solid whenever it comes down to time to kill, and is very loved by pro players. The biggest reason that it's not higher on the list is because it's a lot tougher to use when you don't have a solid mythic or legendary variant. I recently acquired a legendary Fennec, and I can tell you guys it is so much easier to use than trying to use the base version, even when it comes to using a red dot, just because there's so much aim shake on the weapon. With that being said, it's definitely usable at any level. You do have to have a solid amount of recoil control and understand the right situations, but especially for aggressive players, I would highly recommend it. Coming in at number 5 at this point, I don't think the gun is ever going to be outside of our top 10 guns. The SKS certainly remains the long-range king of COD Mobile for a few different reasons. Capable of 2-tapping from anywhere on the map, it's capable of 1-tapping the head from anywhere on the map, has a faster rate of fire than any of the DMR alternatives, and when you're hitting your shots, there's not really any other weapon that's going to be able to match it. Biggest reason that it's not higher up on the list, as I've said many times before, is just because the weapon's lack of versatility and also how difficult it is to use for thumbs players. Because the SKS is the only meta tap fire weapon, it's nearly impossible to use if you're a thumbs player, and even if you're 3 fingers, it's still going to be pretty challenging. Realistically, I think every player, if they want to take COD Mobile seriously, should learn how to play Claw, so hopefully eventually this will be a gun you can try. And if you want to see a video on transitioning to Claw, I might do something like that in the future as well, so make sure to subscribe. Coming in at number 4 is a gun that has definitely been a community favorite for a hot minute. Despite the fact that it was meta for a while, the Grau is definitely still one of the easier to use options on this list. The fact that it doesn't have a ton of recoil has the potential to run a 50-round magazine, which means there's some room for error if you're missing your shots, and the ability to choose your iron sight makes this one of the best options in the entire game, along with the fact that there was a banger ranked reward skin for it. If you're not an uber aggressive player who likes to run and gun with weapons like the Fennec and Switchblade, but you also don't want to sit back with a post-up AR like the Kilo or an SKS, this allows you to play really well in the mid-range while not having a massive disadvantage in the short to long ranges as well. Along with the Grau, we're going to put the new Type 19 assault rifle as well. It has stats that are very comparable and actually received a buff before it was even introduced into the game for multiplayer. The buff gave it an additional little bit of extra mobility and a couple different statistics, and also increased the magazine capacity of the extended mag from 42 up to 48, which makes it very comparable to the Grau. The weapon does also have a DMR conversion mag, very similar to the M67 for the AMAX, and while the stats on it are very solid, there's one thing that I think is going to hold it back, in that it has a slower rate of fire than any of the alternatives like the SKS, the M67 AMAX, or the FMJ AS Val. It is the most forgiving in regards to the lethal zones because you can 2-tap anywhere on the body in the first damage range, but after that it definitely gets a lot more difficult because of that rate of fire. Coming in at number 3, we do have the Switchblade. No surprise, this is not going anywhere on the list, mainly because as far as free-to-play players are concerned, this is the number 1 option as far as SMGs. It's a phenomenal aggressive weapon that doesn't require any additional blueprint, and to be honest, I kind of like the base version better than the Mythic. Obviously, it is going to be pretty limited when it comes to long-range engagements, but if you can control your recoil, it's still doable in the mid-range, and has an up-close time to kill that most other guns are going to struggle to compete with. Coming in at number 2 is a gun that got another buff this season, and I very strongly considered putting it at number 1, but just quite couldn't. For some reason, the DRH, which was already meta, got a headshot multiplier buff that now makes it capable of 2-tapping the head, very similarly to the HVK. On top of that, it has better potential to build it out for range and better mobility than the HVK, so there's very few reasons not to use this gun. The main reason that I do still have the HVK over top of it is simply because of the rate of fire, because that plays such a huge role in so many different scenarios. The DRH is going to have a more consistent 3-tap because of the upper body multipliers and the damage that it does there, so if you're looking for something that's a little bit easier to use, I would definitely recommend the DRH. Obviously, it has both 25-round and 30-round OTM magazines. Those are absolute must-uses if you want to succeed with this weapon. Personally, I prefer the 25-round just because there's no real downsides outside of that smaller magazine capacity, but if you find yourself missing a lot of shots, then the 30 rounds worth a try. And then naturally, as you probably gathered by now, the HVK is still the top dog in COD Mobile, and unfortunately, the large cal mag is restricted from competitive play, which makes me scared that it might not get nerfed anytime soon. Like I already said, the HVK does have a significantly faster fire rate than the DRH, has the potential to 2-tap to the head at pretty ridiculously long range, and its 3-tap potential obviously makes it a very solid overall option, whether you want to play passive or get real aggressive with it. I'll be honest, this is what makes up the majority of my ranked lobby, so I would not be the slightest bit disappointed if it ended up getting nerfed, especially given how dominant it's been over the last few seasons. But that wraps things up for our top 10 guns in COD Mobile. Hope you guys did enjoy. If you did, drop a like down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.